welcome to the first video ranking Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles characters across the franchise. I want to get through some of the recurring characters before we get into the turtles themselves, so today we're going to be starting with Casey Jones. But wait, I need to get dressed for the occasion. Much better. For these rankings, I'm sticking to the 10 on-screen adaptations for simplicity's sake. In chronological order, this includes the 1987 animated series, the 1990 live-action films, The Next Mutation, the 2003 animated series, the 2007 film, the 2012 animated series, the 2010s live-action films, Rise of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Batman vs. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and Mutant Mayhem / Tales of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Because Casey Jones doesn't exist in The Next Mutation, Batman vs., or Mutant Mayhem universes as they currently stand, we will not be touching on those adaptations today. But with that, let's get into the ranking. In last place is Casey Jones from Out of the Shadows. I don't know who sat down and looked at Casey Jones, the vigilante, and thought to themselves, you know what would be a great approach to this character? Making him a cop. Casey being a police officer is so unbelievably antithetical to his character that I can't even bring myself to be mad. I'm just completely baffled. My guess as to why they went this route is because Casey's whole thing, particularly in the 1987 series, is being comically obsessed with the law. However, they took all of the comedy and fun out of that characterization and only kept the law part. I'm not against reinterpreting a character, and I think it could have been a really interesting leaping off point for him to recognize that the legal system was failing at combating the threats present in the city. But despite turning away from his job during the film, it was because he was fired and he was still very dedicated to that dream of becoming a detective. Taking crazy vigilante guy with no actual authority is obsessed with the law and turning him into guy whose job is enforcing the law is not only really annoying, but it's so boring. This is something I'll dive into for the next couple of Caseys on this list as well, but if Casey Jones is boring, you're doing something horribly wrong. He's meant to be chaotic and very memorable, whether that be because he's a little bit crazy or a bit of a dumbass, what have you. There are a lot of ways you could play with Casey Jones' characterization to make him even more compelling, but the choices that they made for Out of the Shadows simply did not work. He just feels like some random guy that circumstantially became an ally to the Turtles, which to be fair is what Casey Jones usually is, but without a distinct personality or compelling story behind the character, I simply do not care about him. Out of the Shadows, Casey Jones is undeniably the worst interpretation of the character. I would have preferred if Casey wasn't in the film at all. In 7th place, I have Casey Jones Jr. from the Rise of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie. I have two main issues with this character, the first being that he got much more time and focus as Casey Jones than his mom did. In the season 2 finale, we learned that the foot recruit is Cassandra Jones, which makes a lot of sense considering her personality and thirst for violence. However, after this reveal, the only taste of Casey actually taking that role as the Turtles' ally is at the end of the film with a few quick pictures of her wearing the hockey mask. The fact that they replaced the actual Casey Jones of this universe with her son from the future irks me to no end. I've seen some people say that Casey Jr. was always intended to be the Rise universe's version of Casey, but it got changed because the show got put on pause indefinitely. I'm not sure how true this is, but ultimately it doesn't matter because I still think it was a bad choice. Cassandra's characterization and personality align so much more with Casey Jones' role in the franchise, which brings me to my second big issue. Quite simply, Casey Jr. is boring. I know a lot of people really enjoy him and he does have some endearing moments, but absolutely none of it reads as Casey Jones. If it weren't for his name and mask, I would have never guessed that this was meant to be a reinterpretation of Casey. But putting the history of the character aside, he only really serves as a plot device in this movie. He goes back in time, drops a bunch of exposition, lectures Leo for being a bad leader, and that's it. I mean, I guess he fights alongside everyone too, which is pretty cool, but that's not really relevant to his characterization. Junior is so easily replaceable with any character that him being Casey Jones is irrelevant and actively irritates me. If I could take any other pre-existing character in the TMNT franchise to replace Casey Jr., I would have swapped him out for Renette. This could be her origin story of the first time she time traveled and was rewarded for managing to save the Earth from the Krang invasion by getting to train to be a Time Lord or whatever. Casey Jr. doesn't have a satisfying conclusion to his story at the end of the film. He's just kind of stuck in the past. But with Renette, those familiar with the franchise could at least recognize that she's probably gonna move on to do some cool time travel stuff. In my personal headcanon and continuation of Rise, Casey Jr. actually meets Renette and the two of them become a time-traveling duo. Because A, that's cute, and B, it gives Casey Jr. something other than being plot and having trauma. I've rambled about Casey Jr. a bit longer than I've intended, but the long and short of it is he doesn't feel like Casey Jones, and he replaced a much more feasible Casey in the Rise universe just for the sake of the film's plot. In 6th place is Casey Jones from TMNT, the 2007 animated film. Something that's going to come up a lot when it comes to the characters in this film in particular is that they don't get a lot of focus and thus don't stand out. We do get a handful of scenes with Casey and Raph, and we also get a taste of his himbo energy with April, but otherwise, he's just sort of there. If you look at this film as a continuation of the 90s live action trilogy, 2007 Casey is probably a bit more enjoyable because there's that pre-existing understanding and enjoyment of 90s Casey. However, I personally see them as firmly separate universes, and 2007 Casey doesn't bring anything unique to the table that makes him stand out from the other versions. I prefer him to Casey Jr. from Rise because he actually has moments in which he feels like Casey Jones, but the two of them simply do not compare to the rest of the Casey Jones lineup. In 5th place is the Casey Jones we were absolutely robbed of seeing more content of, and that is Cassandra Jones from Rise of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. They captured Cassandra being absolutely unhinged very well in this series, and I think her journey and character arc leading to the season 2 finale is really solid. I really wish we could have seen her as Casey Jones, which is a big reason why Casey Jr.'s existence annoys me, as I've already explained thoroughly. The movie would have been the perfect opportunity to showcase Casey finding herself as an ally to the Turtles. I would have loved to see her dynamic with Raph in particular because that duo is one of the staples of this franchise. I also would have loved to see her relationship with April expanded upon after the foundation that was established in Always Be Brownies. I'm sure if Cassandra was given that opportunity to adopt the role of Casey Jones in the Rise universe, she would have been higher on this list. However, based on the canon content that exists, I cannot reasonably put her higher in this ranking. Rise Casey has so much untapped potential, and I hope we'll get to see that explored someday. In 4th place, I have Casey Jones from the 1987 animated series. This man is hilarious and the perfect fit for the 1987 universe. Like I mentioned when talking about Bayverse Casey, 1987 Casey's whole thing is being comically obsessed with the law. Any little infraction, down to jaywalking and littering, Casey will be ready to beat the shit out of any lawbreakers. He's a pretty one-note character, but he's super corny and cartoonish, which makes him so much fun. Surprisingly enough, based solely on Casey's introductory issue in the original comics, I think 1987 Casey is the most comic accurate interpretation of the character. When we first see Casey in the comics, he is literally watching 3 different shows on 3 different TVs laid out in front of him. He was a caricature from the start. But overall, I love 1987 Casey, and he is absolutely perfect for this continuity. Moving into my top 3, in 3rd place is Casey Jones from the 90s live action films. I absolutely love the way that Casey is portrayed in these movies. He's sassy and overconfident, and I thoroughly enjoy the interactions he has with Raph and with April. I also adore the scene in the first film where he and Donnie insult each other alphabetically. It's great. He's incredibly similar to and likely served as a blueprint for 2003 Casey. His himbo energy is phenomenal. I was so disappointed when he wasn't in Secret of the Ooze, but seeing him show up again for TMNT 3 was the best moment in that entire movie. I wish Casey was more relevant in TMNT 3, but the sequences with him teaching hockey to the guys from feudal Japan were pretty fun. Also, 90s Casey is hot. Moving on, in 2nd place, I have Casey Jones from the 2012 animated series. Choosing to make Casey a teenager to lean into that unhinged, in-over-his-head attitude that Casey has was a fantastic choice for this series. Of all of the versions of Casey, this one has the closest relationships with the Turtles individually. I love the way he has a unique friendship with each of them that highlights a different aspect of his personality. I'm also obsessed with his design and how they leaned into him being a hockey boy with missing teeth. There's a reason this is my favorite character to cosplay. He is so much fun. Unfortunately, there are definitely times where Casey can be a bit annoying, and the whole love triangle situation brings out the worst in him like it does with Donnie and April. The way he objectifies April at certain points in the show as well is disgusting, quite frankly. 2012 Casey is a very flawed character, and if I were approaching this list a bit more objectively, I probably would have put him below 90s and 87 Casey. However, there is something about this dumb little chaos gremlin that is just so iconic to me. funny, I love him dearly. And finally, in first place is the himbo himself, 2003 Casey Jones. I love this man so much. He is the perfect depiction of Casey to me. He has that classic Casey Jones intro where Raph fights him, and the way that he and Raph banter in that episode and throughout the rest of the series is fantastic. The evolution of his relationship with April is incredible. I love how they bicker and kind of are awkward around each other as they start developing feelings, but then they get together and get married and back to the sewer, and it's just perfect. Literally every other version of Capril wants what they have in this series, and none of them have been able to achieve it. Like with 2012 Casey, 2003 Casey has that same chaotic dumbass energy, but by the end of the series, he is chugging his respect women juice, and 2012 Casey could definitely take notes. This show also does a phenomenal job of showing how loving and supportive Casey is of the people he cares about, not only with April, but with Angel and his mom and the turtles as well. There are also so many little moments that showcase that Casey is accepted and welcomed as part of this little family. I absolutely adore 2003 Casey Jones. He is undeniably my favorite version of the character. Let me know what you thought of this ranking. Do you agree, disagree, and who is your favorite version of Casey Jones? I'm going to end each of these videos with a segment in which I talk about my own version of the character in question from my personal iteration of TMNT called TMNT Genesis. This is something I've been developing in the background for about a year, but because most of the discussion of this AU has been on TikTok and my TikTok account was banned last week, most of the information that I have posted about it has become inaccessible. So with that, let's talk about my version of Casey Jones from TMNT Genesis. When it comes to Casey and April, I was originally going to make them college age, so they're a little bit older than the Turtles, like in IDW, but ultimately I decided to make them teenagers as well because it fit with the narrative that I wanted to tell a bit better. I also made Casey in this version non-binary, mostly because I couldn't decide what gender I wanted to make them, because as I talked about in this video, Cassandra Jones from Rise has not been thoroughly explored, and so I wanted to have female representation for Casey Jones, but I'm also just such a sucker for that chaos gremlin boy energy as well, so I compromised and just went with non-binary Casey Jones. I also just think non-binary Casey Jones is cool as fuck. As far as Casey Jones's voice, I had canon them as having the voice of Catra from She-Ra.
I'm really gonna need you to shut up. What are you looking at?
I'm sorry, I got angry. It's something I'm working on.
I always knew you were kind of dumb, but come on.
The inspiration for Genesis Casey comes from literally all over the place, but primarily the 2003 animated series, the 2012 animated series, and Rise. So let's get into some backstory. Casey grew up in a less than nice part of town, and their dad kind of got in trouble with the Purple Dragons, and so the Purple Dragons kind of showed up and beat the shit out of him, so now he's in the hospital. Casey's mom is also dead, so she's out of the picture. But now Casey has kind of been saddled with this responsibility of raising their little sister, Marie. If you look at the design that I made for Casey Jones, you may have noticed that they have a scar by their lip. That was actually from a skating accident with Marie in which she sort of fell over and the skate slashed Casey's face. I think giving Casey a visual representation of ice skating like the missing teeth with 2012 Casey is just fun. I also really wanted to highlight Casey's individual relationships with the Turtles. So with Marie in particular, Leo will sometimes help Casey out and babysit Marie because, I don't know, that's cute. And I kind of wanted to showcase a dynamic similarly to Leo and the little girl in the 2012 animated series when they're having a little tea party, because that's fun. And it just is very in character for Leo to want to help a friend out when they're in need. As for the Raph and Casey dynamic, Raph is the youngest of the Turtles in this iteration, so he's about 3 years younger than Casey, and he very much looks up to them as a bit of a role model, which maybe isn't the best because Casey's a bit of a mess and chaotic and doesn't always, you know, think things through, but they're great friends and they just have such a fun dynamic with each other, very similar to what their typical dynamic is, but a bit more of that role model figure is what Casey is to Raph. Their dynamic with Mikey is kind of similar to 2012 as well, where they're just chaotic, there to have fun, have a good time. Because Casey is, you know, kind of living alone with their little sister, they have to cook from time to time. They're not very good at it. Something that I think would be really fun is if Casey and Mikey had these little cooking competitions where they're both kind of terrible at it, but it's a fun way for them to bond and get everyone else involved and taste their terrible cooking. When it comes to Casey's relationship with April, I'll touch upon this when I explain April's story a bit more, but both of them have a parent that's dead and a parent that's currently in the hospital. So they kind of bond about feeling responsible and needing to kind of grow up faster than they're ready to. Casey and April getting together as a couple could work in this universe because of the way I've written them. I could see that being cute, but I opted to not pair them together in favor of two other relationships. April's I will talk about in her video, but for Casey, I am such a sucker for Donatello, so, you know, Casey gets with Donnie. I just love the dynamic they have in the 2012 series, and kind of carrying that dynamic into this universe I think could be really fun. Something that they would particularly bond over is Donatello is the oldest of the turtles in this universe, so they kind of bond over needing to be responsible and feeling responsible for their younger siblings and worrying about them getting into trouble constantly. But that's the basic summary of Genesis Casey Jones. Ask any other questions you have in the comments, and I will answer them to the best of my ability based on what I've developed so far. Something you may have picked up on from my descriptions of Casey is that I want TMNT Genesis to really focus on identity and the turtles discovering themselves, so I have a lot of queer characters in this universe. At some point I want to make a video talking about the history of LGBTQ+ characters in the TMNT franchise, because we are criminally underrepresented, which is kind of surprising considering the narrative of the turtles being outcast from society for just being themselves and being ostracized because they're not allowed to just exist as themselves in society. It feels like that would lend itself perfectly well to discussion of queer identities. In any case, I'm not going to cater TMNT Genesis to anyone who takes issue with the inclusion of queer stories and characters in TMNT. This is my interpretation of these characters and my story, so if you take issue with it, respectfully fuck off. I'm always going to advocate for my channel to be safe, welcoming, and inclusive, and if that means gatekeeping the gatekeepers, I will gladly do so. Thank you for watching my Casey Jones character ranking and sticking around to listen to me ramble about Genesis Casey. Let me know which character you would like to see me rank next, and I'll see y'all next time.